Thank you for that. I'm going to reintroduce myself. My name is Cindy White, and I serve as the CMO at Mitek Systems, and I will be your host for today. After this very short introduction, I will hand over to Mark Child, the Associate Research Director, European Security at IDC, and he will step us through the findings of the study that we engaged IDC to conduct with both consumers and small businesses. Enterprises actually too. Adam Bassi, a Senior Director of Product Marketing at Mitek Systems, will follow Mark in presentation, helping us better understand the solutions that biometric authentication leaves us as we fight financial crimes. And then we're going to follow that up with plenty of time for each of you to ask questions that you might have to either Mark or Adam. And we will ask you to put those questions into the chat that you see on your screen, and we'll navigate through those as appropriate. I would also like to remind many of you who will want to know, yes, you are going to get the presentation. This session is recorded, and we will be sharing the presentation to all attendees. So with that brief introduction, Mark, I'm excited to introduce you. We're thrilled to have engaged with IDC on such an important topic. You know, account takeover, first-party fraud, biometric authentication, AI-generated fraud attacks. These are all words that are whirling around with greater fury in today's world, and we are thrilled that we have the results of this study to share with the attendees today. So over to you, Mark.
Thank you very much, Cindy, and great to be here with everyone. This has been a really interesting project for us in what is a very interesting area of the market. IDC tracks technology developments in all sectors. I specifically focus on cybersecurity and look at the challenges that many organizations are facing in the areas of identity, access management, authentication, and more. So if we can move on to the first slide. So as Cindy said, we were engaged by Mitek to conduct surveys among both businesses that are offering online products and services. We surveyed 300 such businesses across the US, Canada, UK, and Ireland, in a number of sectors, financial services, gambling and gaming, and others such as online hotel booking services, and so on, and a whole spectrum of size of organizations. We also spoke to consumers, more than 1,000 respondents across those same 4 countries who are using online services, products, to get their experiences with authenticating and using those services. So if we can go to the next slide. So, and one more click. So what is the challenge that organizations are facing? Well, basically, the whole spectrum, whether it's banking, hotel booking, online marketplaces, are being targeted by fraudsters and cyber criminals who are taking over accounts. There are problems for the end users who are still struggling with password-based authentication, and those password systems are often targeted by cyber criminals. So we're looking at biometrics as a means to make authentication more secure and straightforward. Next click, please. So as we all know, this is now supported by most digital service providers and enabled on most of the devices we're using, whether it's a smartphone, a tablet, a notebook. And our research, which we'll dig into in more depth, found that consumers that are using biometrics tend to be more satisfied with authentication processes than those that aren't. That said, not all of the consumers that we interviewed fully understand or accept the use of biometrics. One more click, please. So our conclusion is that there need to be greater educational initiatives to drive the adoption of biometrics among your customer bases. And this is increasingly going to be important with the emergence of new challenges, things such as the AI generation of deepfakes. Now, deepfakes is not the only concern, not the only way that fraudsters are looking to scam businesses and consumers. And after I've finished, Adam is going to talk you through some of the steps that your organization can take to tackle some of the challenges that are being faced. So next slide, please. And one more click. So one of the key problems is that many organizations are still using legacy authentication solutions, which can be problematic both in terms of security and user experience. So once an account takeover happens, the resolution of that can be very difficult. For the user, there can be a risk of financial losses and other damages. According to our survey, more than a third of those respondents said that due to an unsatisfactory resolution of an account takeover, they switched to another service provider. So it's a big risk for organizations. And wouldn't it be better to avoid such attacks happening in the first place? What can we do about this? Next slide, please. And one click. So to date, users have been predominantly using password-based authentication. But as you can see from the data here, it's an extremely frustrating and inconvenient method for them. Anything from a third to 20% of customers are unsatisfied in one way or another with username and password processes, and they're becoming less effective as a security measure. One more click. In comparison, among the users that are using biometrics, only 1 in 20 say it's a struggle for them. So if we can move on to the next slide. So we compared the satisfaction of users that are using biometrics to authenticate with those that aren't. And as you can see from the figures on the right, there are some considerable increases, up more than 20% higher in the top case there, in satisfaction between users authenticating with biometrics and without biometrics. Next slide, please. And build out. So as you can see, among users of biometrics, 3/4 of respondents using it on their smartphone or tablet say they're satisfied, 2/3 using it on their PC and notebook. I mean, particularly on our handheld devices, these methods have become so intuitive. Think about it. You're already holding your phone in your hand. If you're required to do a face scan, it's already there. You almost don't need to think about doing it. And with each new generation of devices, these authentication processes, the scanners, the software behind them, is being improved. So it's an even more comfortable experience. Next slide, please. But one of the concerns around organization by end users of these organizations is, can we trust the biometric authentication? So maybe let's look at it from the perspective of the B2B organizations. So what are, according to our survey, the most important considerations for them when interacting with their existing customers online? And the number one is providing a user-friendly authentication and comfortable user experience. Also, securing authentication processes and providing immediate customer support in case of difficulties. So the bottom line, one more click, is that organizations are looking out for their customers and doing everything in their capability to improve authentication processes. So on to the next slide. So how does this translate into the actual market reality? So almost 2/3 of organizations already allow biometric authentication to enable their customers to access their services. In some areas, it's even higher, as we might expect. In the financial sector, 97% of providers. One more click, please. One more click. And there are many key, we've jumped on one. Okay, the slides are a little uncooperative today. If we could go back one slide. Yeah. So there are three key reasons why organizations are providing biometric authentication. First of all, improved compliance. So this has a double benefit. It's protecting the customer data, ensuring the trust with the customer, and at the same time ensuring compliance with regulators. Improved security. We've already talked a little bit about the big problems with password-based authentication. Biometrics is more secure than many other legacy authentication methods. And then for the users, it's simply more convenient than trying to remember dozens, hundreds of usernames and passwords, particularly as they are pressured to make passwords more complex and harder to crack, which at the same time makes them harder to memorize. So next slide, please. So we see robust provision by the providers, but in terms of consumers using biometrics, it still lags behind a little. In terms of financial services, when it comes to your traditional current account, online banking services, almost half of consumers are already using biometrics. For other financial services, it's a little lower, 22% for a credit card account, 20% for checking a savings or deposit account. And this does go all the way down to 2% in one of the youngest segments of the banking sector, peer-to-peer lending. And we think it's no coincidence that that sector has the highest dissatisfaction with authentication processes at 25%. So biometrics could obviously provide a benefit there. Now, among non-financial services, the penetration of users using biometrics is slightly lower. So the highest there being Amazon online marketplaces, fundamentally. Amazon or eBay as examples there, with around 18% of consumers. It is worth noting that as of November, Amazon has rolled out support for passkeys, which is one of the technologies that promises to make authentication a lot more convenient across multiple platforms for end users. But overall, we do see that there is a shortfall in biometric authentication adoption, particularly among those non-financial services. Next slide, please. So while we see high satisfaction among those that are using biometric authentication already. There is a subset of customers who have concerns around biometrics, often for historical reasons. So these seem to fall into two main categories. So if we go to the next slide. First of all, there are concerns about spoofing. So in the past, we've all seen media reports about hackers who tried to spoof scanners with things like photos, videos, face masks, masks for face scans, and so on. However, modern biometric scanners and capabilities have much higher technical capabilities compared to 10 or even 5 years ago. The biometrics hardware and software components are increasingly advanced. They provide high quality images and they meet international standards. And the matching algorithms have been improved as well. And this makes it much harder to spoof biometric scans. In addition, on the back end, which the user may not even be aware of, in addition to scanning the face scan, the provider is often checking for liveness as an additional factor, and that makes it even harder to spoof. And as we look to the future, we're hearing a lot about deep fakes these days, but things like voice scans, for example, are going to be very hard for deep fakes to beat. And deepfake protection tools are going to be increasingly built on the back end by the providers of these services and capabilities. Next slide, please. So the other challenge is around the safety of the biometric data. We've all heard the saying, oh, you know, I can change my password if it gets stolen, but I can't change my fingerprint. The reality is that organizations are not storing personally identifiable information in a plain format where hackers could steal it. These are being converted into templates of ones and zeros that cannot be decrypted by third parties. So this is another concern that needs to be addressed among prospective users, that they're not at risk of losing their biometric data. Next slide, please. So just to really hammer home the fact that we should be driving greater biometrics adoption, according to our survey, more than 80% of organizations have already made investments in improving their customer authentication technology and processes. So better tech is out there, get the customers on board. And another key development is the launching of multimodal authentication capabilities, where the authentication process adds a second biometric capability. So for example, a face scan and a voice scan. And that can be done very quickly. So it's still convenient for the user, but it's that much more challenging for hackers and fraudsters. Next slide, please. So I'm going to wrap up quite quickly, and I'm almost out of time, but just looking to the future then, as we move into this period of intense threats from outside our organizations, it's really important that the investments that we've all been making in providing more robust biometric authentication capabilities are transferred through to our customer bases, because with that it will drive greater traction in the market, less customer frustration, less risk, and a virtuous cycle. One more slide to close me off. And as we look to the future, with talk in a lot of regions about governments offering single reusable digital identities that we can use to authenticate in more products and services at once, then having that biometric authentication in front of that digital identity is going to provide a really safe and secure service for all of our users. So that's all from me, and now I'm going to hand over to Adam, who's going to talk to you about some of the steps your organization can take to start moving forward in this area. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Mark. I got to admit, it will obviously be a little bit tough to follow you, given you know, all of the great information in that particular journey. But hopefully, I'll be able to add just a little bit of context to what folks can on this call can actually do with this information and sort of use it in a useful way for their organizations. So, you know, one of the structures that I actually like to keep in mind whenever I see a new industry report or scientific study is one called the data in action framework. So, if you'll go to the next slide. The reason that I like to use this framework is it's really sort of just intended to remind us that data is a source of information, but you know, if that information can be absorbed and applied, then it becomes, you know, and that can be in our lives or to our businesses, it becomes knowledge, and knowledge can lead to action. And that's really hopefully what we can get out of this, right? So let's talk through a couple of pieces of information that we can observe from the data, some of the things that Mark sort of talked about previously, but then we'll build on that to land on 3 sort of concrete actions that organizations can actually take. So, you know, first, let me state the obvious, right? And I think Mark already mentioned this, consumers, and by that, I mean all of us on this call, right? We have already gotten much more comfortable with biometrics. We use them all the time to unlock our phones and our laptops. I mean, this is like a daily occurrence. And that usage pattern is exactly what, you know, Apple and Microsoft envisioned when they rolled out Face ID and Microsoft Hello. They wanted to provide an easier, simpler experience for their users. And that was really the one and only goal. So go to the next slide. We'll pull up, you know, some information from the study, and these are things that Mark mentioned, right? 33% of respondents struggle with passwords. By contrast, only 5% struggle with biometrics. That's 1 in 3 people have problems with passwords. 1 in 20 have problems, you know, with biometrics. That is a much simpler experience. And really, I think that's why, you know, it sort of points to the wave of biometrics that is now kind of pushing forward across a lot of different industries. So next slide, we'll go back to another data point. If you look at the data from this report, right, banks, who we know were some of the first to really bring biometric authentication into their customer interactions, as you saw, 22% increase in customer satisfaction after introducing biometrics. And then 77% of survey respondents from this survey said that they were satisfied with biometric authentication. So that's huge, and it sort of begs the question, right, with positive results like that, why aren't biometrics already everywhere? Well, for starters, I will go back to the data again, and I will reiterate on the next slide. You know, the data from this survey shows that 63% of organizations allow biometric authentication capabilities to access their services. So, I mean, that is a huge number, right? That's 2/3 of businesses are already allowing biometrics in some way, shape, or form to access their services. But despite their rising popularity, and this is where we start kind of getting into actions, there's a lot of research around biometrics, including in this survey, as Mark mentioned, that show that there are still laggards to adoption. And I think when you look at the root cause, it's usually because of actually misconceptions around how the technology works. That second thing that Mark mentioned, right? The previous one is a little bit of legacy around spoofing. But right now, the biggest concern is really stemming from questions around the use and the storage of personally identifiable information, or PII, right? Consumers still have questions about, is XYZ company going to be storing my picture and a recording of my voice somewhere where hackers and fraudsters can potentially steal it? Now, that kind of does always make me laugh, because if anyone on this call is like me, right, we've already got countless images of ourselves and videos of ourselves that are freely posted on social media channels. But if you put all that aside, you know, it really does come down to the need for better education. So next slide. The reality of the technology, as Mark mentioned, is that biometrics are not stored as images or audio files. They're stored as unique numerical templates. And that really, what that means is there's nothing for fraudsters to steal, because only that system has the appropriate algorithm to decipher and match that template. So I think that's something that organizations and frankly, you know, providers like Mitek, who are in the industry, we need to do a better job of explaining. We need to help demystify the technology for some of the end users. So next slide, that brings me to my first action, right? Or my first key takeaway. And that's, if you've already introduced biometrics into your customer interactions, but maybe you're not seeing adoption as quickly as you'd like, consider more educational materials or touch points, right? And similarly, if you are looking at rolling out biometrics soon, make sure customer education is part of your rollout plan. The more education that you do upfront before asking your end users to enroll their biometrics, the more likely you are to see higher adoption rates and really sort of overall usage across your customer base. It is imperative for them to understand how the technology will work and how it will benefit them before you ask them, hey, can I get a picture of you or can I get a voice sample from you? And that sort of brings me to my next point. So second slide. Consider when and how you introduce biometrics, right? It's really important to be mindful of where in the consumer lifecycle users are more willing or maybe more interested in biometric enrollment. The one that we always talk about and we think about really early on is onboarding, and that is an absolutely great place. Let's say that during your onboarding process, you're going to compare a selfie to a government issued doc, and you're going to compare the photo on the doc to a live selfie and make sure, and you're using liveness and all those good things to make sure that person is who they are when they register. That is absolutely a smart time to ask them, hey, would you like to just enroll this selfie as a way to authenticate later? 100% do that. But there are also other opportunities, especially if you have a large customer base already in place that's not going to be onboarding anytime soon because they're already on your platform, right? So, password resets is a good one. And frankly, any other sort of self-service account maintenance action, those things typically have friction to them. So if there's friction there, it's a great time to sort of ask them, hey, would you like to enroll your biometrics so that next time you don't have to worry about resetting your password or forgetting your password or losing it. The other one is, after a significant event, and this is one that I've sort of seen a couple of companies do really well, because it really can either be a significant event for that consumer, or it can just be something in the news. And sort of the example there would be like a large breach. If a large breach happens and you decide to run a campaign that says, I don't know, wouldn't you like to add stronger security to your account? Customers are a lot more likely to be receptive to that message at that point. So it's something where you can monitor the industry, monitor what's happening with particular customers, and find a really good time to ask them, hey, would you like better, stronger security? They might be a lot more receptive to biometrics at that point. And I guess that's the last piece I'll say on this one is, you can and you really should sort of tailor your positioning of biometrics towards the appropriate need, right? Are they more likely to want convenience right now because of password reset example, right? Or would they like greater security? And that's, the right after the breach example. So know that you can tailor the message to sort of fit the need. And then that will actually bring me to my last key takeaway. And if we go to the next slide, if you really want, both of those two benefits, convenience plus security, right? Both things, you need to consider enterprise grade SaaS biometrics over consumer grade biometrics. And what do I mean by consumer grade biometrics? Well, I think most of us have probably noticed that, some applications now let us sign in using biometrics on our devices, right? Those same ones that Apple and others introduced strictly for convenience. The problem is that's really sort of missing the mark on the security aspect of biometrics, because it's not really a verification of identity. It's just a proxy for a PIN code. Most of us know if I've got a Halloween mask on, or if I'm wearing a ball cap and sunglasses, maybe my Face ID doesn't work on my phone. All I have to do is just enter in my 4-digit PIN and I still get in. So just like a PIN code, that type of access can be shared, and that's really one of the key pitfalls. And I'll dive into sort of two particularly, starting with that one, right? People share access to their devices all the time. So if you let your spouse or your child access your phone, even if they are using their own biometrics, right? When that e-commerce site or that stock trading platform asks for permission to place an order using on-device biometrics, it will still approve for any user of that device, right? It's not verifying that the person on the other end is a specific person. It's just, do they have access to the device? So again, using on-device biometrics for a third-party app doesn't actually verify an identity. It just verifies that the person has access to that device. And that, if you're a security person like me and in the industry, is sort of scary. And that brings me to sort of the second pitfall, right? If you think about what that means for MFA best practices, right? Typically in MFA, you want to have two different factors. It's something you know, something you have, and something you are, right? The problem is, when that's something you are, is really just, do you have permission to access this device? It actually kind of becomes something you have. And so when you get that second factor, you log in with your face, and then maybe they push you a one-time passcode and OTP, right? Well, that's just another something you have. I still have access to the device. So let's say that things aren't great at home with my wife. They are, by the way, happily married, things are good. But if she decides to log into my 401k, because she has access to my phone with her face, and then my 401k Fidelity sends me a one-time passcode, she's holding the device. So at any point, she can access my 401k and she can make transfers, she can change my stock holdings, she can do whatever she wants. I'm okay with that right now, but again, that's the point of the security aspect. It's not actually securing it for a specific person. Fidelity doesn't know it's me on the other end of the device, it's just someone on the other end of the device that's allowed to have access to that device. So I won't belabor the point too much. If you'll go to the next slide, I will try and do my best to wrap up. I was asked to keep this short and tight, so I will do exactly that. But my 3 key actions are this, right? Double down on user education. There is nothing you can do more for your customers than explain to them upfront how the technology works and what benefit it will have for them, especially when it comes to the PII portion of it. Explain to them that it's not their picture that's just held in some server somewhere, even if they are on Facebook and have a million Instagram photos. That's not what you're going to be doing with their photo. It will be ones and zeros, numerical template. That will really help the uptake of biometrics in your business. 2, be mindful and obviously intentional about when and I guess really the way in which you introduce biometrics into the user lifecycle, right? There are a lot of different times in the user lifecycle where they may be more interested in doing it than just a random campaign going out there. So, be mindful. And again, that brings me to the last one, right? Don't miss out on the security aspect of biometrics. It's one of the main reasons to go down the path of including biometrics in your workflows or in your access and authentication practice. It's the security aspect. So don't just default to on-device biometrics. So with that, I will wrap up. I think we're going to open it up for questions. So I will turn it back over to Cindy.
Thanks, Adam. And thank you, Mark. Very insightful. I love the flow. I'm also excited for our audience because we've got a ton of questions and we have time to answer them. So kudos to you both for getting through that important material. The first question, Adam, is directly off the bat of your wrap up. So I'm going to ask it super orderly, if that's okay. Adam, you talked about the need for biometric education, as did Mark, but who do you think is best suited to provide that level of education to consumers?
I'm also interested in Mark's response on this one too, so maybe we can go a twofer on it. I think the best thing that can happen for consumers is the organization that is asking for them to do some of that education, because again, it will feel more genuine and authentic coming from the business that is then asking for that. But I also think, and this is just me sitting in the chair that I'm sitting in, there are a lot of businesses like ours at Mitek where we need to do broader campaigns of really educating consumers on how the technology works, just in general. So I think it's two-pronged, but I think when you're talking about a specific campaign, the business or organization that is wanting to implement biometrics needs to be very intentional about that up front.
And if I can then just add to Adam's there, then I think both of those parties that Adam mentioned are key. But I would state that a collaborative approach can be even more beneficial. So for the provider of the product or the service, there's already trust established between that provider and the customer. So as Adam said, they're ready to listen. But if it's your bank in association with a reputable security technology provider, then that's even greater reassurance to the customer that the bank is working on providing the most advanced and secure solutions for their customer base. And I guess then the only other consideration is how and when do you deliver that information, because obviously you already have a user base that's using biometrics and is satisfied. It's the other part of the user base that you're trying to reach out to. So it's the question of when to address those.
Thank you. And, you know, when I think about education, I think about customer experience. And we noted from the report, Mark, that almost half of all the businesses said the reason that they would implement biometrics was user-friendly authentication and a convenient user experience. And so do you have, Mark, any guidance to organizations who haven't started this journey on how that might fold into the education? Think about user experience and education as a flow.
I would have to go back into the data and do a little more digging there.
I think it was convenience. If I'm to remember the data, it was really a lot around, you know, the imperceptible convenience. Adam, do you have any best practices or use cases that we've seen in our business of how we get, you know, better user experience? Oh, Adam, you may be on mute.
Apologies. Yeah, I will say there's maybe two things that I can think of. So one, you know, and Mark touched on this earlier too, the liveness aspect when it comes to facial biometrics is really key. You want to make sure that it's not a screen replay, somebody holding up a video or a deep fake or something like that, an injection attack of a virtual camera. But the way that liveness is done is actually important. There's two things that we talk about in the industry, passive liveness and active liveness. A lot of organizations will do active liveness, so they will have flashing lights or things like that. So if a light flashes red, then green, then red again while you're taking the selfie, and they actually take a short video. And if the lights don't flash in the right order, well then, hey, we know you're not really there and it's fake. The problem with that is you do that one time if you're a fraudster, you see what the flashing lights are, and then it's really easy. I can go back and get a video off of Instagram or YouTube or wherever the heck I want of a person and just do a quick overlay of red, green, red. So as soon as you do sort of give a liveness check, you kind of give away how you're doing it to the fraudster and you make it a lot easier for them. So that's one piece. And then when you talked about the convenience side of it, the other nice thing about the passive liveness is nobody really knows that it's happening in the background. So it's imperceptible, it's quick, it's very convenient. And then the other one I will talk about, and then I will stop talking is, you know, Mark also touched on multimodal biometrics. You know, from a security aspect, it's huge, right? You add two different factors, it makes it twice as hard to sort of fake or circumvent, but that can add a lot of friction, right? It can't be that, you know, I have to do this thing and then I have to go to a different device to do a second thing, and it takes a long time to do. So if you are looking at multimodal biometrics because you have, you know, a need for really secure biometrics on your particular application, and, you know, banks are a key example of that, just make sure that it's a really smooth UI and UX. That should be a very quick selfie, a very quick, you know, voice capture, and done if those are your modes. So just making sure that it's a very short and easy way to do it is sort of key when you start looking at multiple types of biometrics in your workflow.
And guide their face and give them a prompt for the voice so that they know why they're being asked. Yep. Thank you, Adam, and thank you, Mark. To follow that up, and you mentioned it a little bit in your previous answer, but there is a question from the audience. How technically accurate are biometrics, and do you think it replaces multi-factor?
Is that for me, for Mark?
I beg your pardon. I think I'm going to put that on you, since you are so au fait with multi-factor, and biometrics is a really, really appropriate replacement.
Yeah, I mean, and some of this goes back to I have a history in identity and access management as well. You know, past life, as it were. I think multi-factor authentication is really important when done right, and there's a reason that there are those three factors, right? Something you have, something you know, something you are. It's important because it basically makes it very hard to triangulate on all of the pieces that somebody would need to circumvent that or to spoof you. Biometrics become a really key front end of that, but they should be part of multi-factor. Again, the example that I give on you know, Face ID, versus getting a one-time passcode. Well, Face ID, if I fail that on a phone, but I know that person's 4-digit or 6-digit PIN on their phone, I can still get into their phone. And then when that one-time passcode comes in, I'm on their phone. So to me, that's not multi-factor authentication. But if you have a third-party SaaS biometrics application really checking and doing the biometric factor, and then a one-time passcode comes in, that is two legitimate factors, and I think that's key. So biometrics don't replace multi-factor authentication. They should not, absolutely, but they are a key component of making it stronger.
Mark, I saw you nodding there. Would you like to add?
Yeah, no, I mean, Adam captured it pretty much there, but yeah, it's really about enhancing or augmenting the MFA rather than replacing it. Just one quote I saw just last week was from the head of cybersecurity at the NSA, who said, I think it was something like, if MFA was everywhere, it would stop something like 75% of attacks. So, I can't stress the number of CISOs that I've talked to who said, we would like to have MFA throughout the organization. It's key to authentication security, and biometrics is a part of that.
So with that in mind, Mark, this is a question back to you though, and very timely from the audience. Are there big differences in effectiveness between the different types of biometric capabilities, such as face, voice, fingerprint, etc.?
Yeah, I mean, I will ultimately defer to Adam on this one, but what I have seen, if you look at multiple different testing sites that have looked at the effectiveness of different biometric capabilities, it's not a consistent set of scores or ratings. A lot depends on a really good implementation, how it's deployed, and who the provider is. So again, it comes back, I think, to some extent to what Adam was saying before about look beyond just consumer biometrics. But yeah, there's not one set of scores that we can go to and say this factor is the most accurate. Adam, I don't know if you want to add to that.
Yeah, I mean, I will say, I think, and this is sort of what you're pointing to, saying that there's not a specific set of scores out there. I don't know that there are a huge difference in effectiveness, right, between fingerprint readers and like facial biometrics. In fact, facial biometrics have gotten like 20-fold higher accuracy to get to the point that they are as accurate as fingerprint scanners. So, differences in effectiveness, maybe not, but I think, part of it is that fingerprint readers have been around for a really long time, but primarily were being used for like physical access. And I think that's one of those things that, that's one of the differences that's not in effectiveness, but it's in sort of the use case. If you're using them for physical access, then it makes a lot of sense for fingerprint readers, but maybe not so much facial biometrics. However, when you start talking about what consumer devices have and end users, right, most phones don't actually have, fingerprint scanners on them anymore. That's not a thing. So every single phone out there at this point, from, I don't know, whatever first model of iPhone there were, they have cameras. And so I think from a convenience standpoint, facial biometrics have become a much more easy to implement and convenience feature than fingerprint readers. And then, the other one, it just popped into my head and I have no idea why, but the other thing that was a little bit more of a touch point probably 2 years ago and is probably irrelevant now, but sort of like the contactless nature of facial biometrics or voice biometrics versus fingerprint scanners, right? Like obviously during the height of the pandemic, everybody putting their finger on the same place was probably a really scary proposition for all of us. Probably not as big a deal now, but that imperceptible user convenience piece of just not having to really sort of interact with the device or the camera is a little bit easier too. So again, not really touching on effectiveness, but yeah.
I wanted to add to that one. I'm in the middle of a Prague winter, and the thought of taking off my glove to use a fingerprint scanner is not always what I want to be thinking of. But think of a lot of professions where someone might not be able to easily use a fingerprint scanner. I was painting a garden shed in the summer, and I had paint all over. I could not unlock my phone. So facial scans from a convenience point of view really do have some big pluses.
Yeah, I agree with all of those. And then, you know, the question was around security, and I'm going to go back to quote you, Adam, in that multiple layers or multimodals of biometrics is where you're going to get the security. So if you can find a workflow or a solution for your consumers where you snap the face and capture the voice and then prove its liveness in an instance, that's where you're going to get the most robust security, where it's using multiple modes of biometrics at the same time. So, you know, data, we love the data that we get, and we love to use it as per your first slide, Adam. But the question coming in from the panelist is, how do you securely store the biometric data to ensure it's not compromised? So if you could go over that again for this particular audience member.
Yeah, I mean, I'll make a general comment, and then I'll make a Mitek specific comment. So the general comment is, you know, obviously, if you are looking at providers, let's say that you haven't already implemented biometrics and you are looking at providers to partner with to actually implement biometrics, you know, do not be afraid to ask them, hey, you know, we need to see your SOC security compliance certificate. We need to understand how you're handling the data. You know, if it's in AWS, great. Which secure clouds are it in? Do you have, you know, failovers to different places? So all of those questions are important. Make sure that you are asking them of any provider that you are thinking about, you know, talking to. The other piece that is, you know, specific to Mitek, but is a general commentary on the technology, right? Is reminder, there's not a technology on the back end that takes a picture and overlays it on top of another picture and just sees if they match up. It's actually taking those images, right, and turning them into a really unique template based on all kinds of different algorithms. The algorithm of that particular company is unique to that company. So Mitek has its own proprietary algorithms for how it maps a face and uses them. So at the end of the day, like the security aspect of it is really around, you know, not just how they're storing the information. That's those first questions. What's your SOC compliance? How do you actually store the information as an organization? You know, what security controls do you have in place? Do you do pen testing? All of that good stuff. But also, you know, how in depth or how long has that company been working with biometrics? How long has their algorithm sort of been in place? How much refining do they do to those things over time? You know, Mitek as an organization, we own another company called IDR&D that is, you know, very, 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 very highly awarded in both facial and voice biometrics. So it's one of those places where we hang a lot of pride and value on the complexity of our algorithms and how we actually break that information down.
Thank you, Adam.
It's a long-winded answer. Sorry.
No. I think it is an important one, as we saw that it was a concern in the survey, and it's important for us to answer that. So thank you for the question from the audience member. This one is for Mark. It says, does biometric help in combating the threat of quantum computing?
That's a nice one. So I have to stress that's not my core field of research. However, one of my colleagues in the European team is part of an IDC worldwide group that is looking at the implications of quantum computing, particularly from a security perspective. You know, obviously, one of the key risks is that cyber criminals are often attacking and breaching data sets that they are not able to access yet, but they're looking to just keep them on the back burner until quantum capabilities become more readily available and they can start cracking into those data sets. So although this is quite a future-looking concern, from an organizational perspective, we are already having conversations with major organizations who are saying, we also want to start building in quantum safe data protection from the perspective of what might be broadly available 5 years down the line. So I'm not fully sure on how biometrics plays into that yet, but if you are a major organization, particularly in the financial sector, there are conversations that are going on. There are organizations that are thinking about how to prepare, and you should potentially be having those conversations yourself as well.
Thank you. Yeah, please go ahead, Adam.
Well, the one other thing I'll add to that, and by the way, thank you for asking the really hard question to Mark and not me. But I will say, you know, one of the main things to just keep in mind from just a general broad security standpoint is sort of the defense in depth principle, right? You need to have a multi-layered approach. So some of these things, you know, where you're looking at neural net model defense, or you're looking at, you know, image compression detection, or some of the other things, look for solutions or start talking to providers that are thinking ahead of additional things that they will need, because, you know, to Mark's point, it is an evolving and very broad topic, and you know, AI in general as an accelerator for fraud is going to take a lot of different forms over the next, you know, 4 or 5, I mean, honestly 4 or 5 months probably, but for certain over the next, you know, 3 to 5 years. So you just have to have a well-rounded defense posture against it, because there is no, you know, single silver bullet that will just stop all types of AI fraud.
There isn't, and I think the more that we are open with the common enemy being fraud, and the more that we're learning from one another, and the organizations that have already successfully adopted it, they're still learning and still finding more efficient and secure ways to use the technology. So we've reached both the end of our questions and the end of the webinar. And so I don't know if Adam and Mark, if you could just share a last remark, and then we will close for this morning. Over to you, Mark.
Sure. Well, I think that last very difficult question kind of pointed to what we should all be thinking about, which is, you know, the future is already happening. We've seen how rapidly generative AI has exploded this year. So organizations really need to be looking not at what's happening now, but where's the market going? What are the threats going to be in, you know, the next couple of years, and look to get ahead of the game. And biometrics is going to be one of the key weapons in the arsenal, which, as Adam said, is about layered approaches and strength in depth. It's going to be one of the key weapons in protecting against hackers and fraudsters. So don't wait until it's too late.
And oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was concurring with Mark, and then going to pass over to you.
Yeah, similar comment. And the thing that I will say too, you know, is biometrics is one of the unique ones, at least for right now, in terms of not just being security, which, you know, we sort of wrapped up on the security piece, but going back to where they sort of originated from, which is the user convenience piece of it. So it is very nice that biometrics in particular both help create a better security posture, but also can add a better user experience. That's typically rare, because a lot of times when we're talking security, we're talking friction. So it is definitely something to consider, because it helps on both ends of that spectrum. So, and then also everyone will get, I think, be getting a version of the IDC report as well. Is that accurate?
Yes, that is. And so that was going to be my encouragement to this team. If you're starting on this journey, if you're refining this journey, there's some really insightful insights that were made available through the study. We're thrilled to have had the opportunity to engage with IDC and to research with both consumers and enterprises. and we are thrilled to share those findings with you post this webinar. So with that, I'm going to close the webinar today. Thank you to everybody for the very well-prepared questions that you gave to our two panelists, and thank you, Mark, and thank you, Adam, for a great presentation. And with that, we will close for today. Thank you, everyone, and have a lovely day.
Cheers. Bye.
Thank you.